Oh,
Good.
you're good. Go ahead, Miguel.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. You can keep going, Samuel.
I was just going to say, like, we're actually in conference week. We were supposed to do that today, but with them
Hmm.
canceling it, we're good. And then we go 8 to 8 tomorrow with conferences.
Wow.
Yeah,
Seems like a heavy thing for you.
they cancel,
How
like
many?
what they do is they have us go until 8, like tonight, and then tomorrow night, and then they give us Friday off for doing
Hmm.
that. So
So you just have a time requirement that calls have to last.
yeah,
Yeah. See, same way here in Oklahoma too. So
Mhm.
you have to show 6 hours. You can divide it up into 2 evenings, or you can do early release and start them, at like go from 2 to 8, which law
Yeah,
schools do that, and then they're out on Friday. So yeah, some schools do, Tuesday, Thursday, out on Friday, 2 3 hour
yeah,
session. So get better turnout doing it in the evenings. In the daytime with
yes,
parents working, you don't get very good participation. So um,
very much
yeah,
so.
yeah, no doubt. Okay. Well, we'll talk a little bit here about the assignment coming up. Just going to kind of review, clarify any questions you guys might have. We're going to look at the kind of the rubric and what we're looking for this time on the norm reference. Both of you that's on tonight, do you feel comfortable right now where you're at with the norm reference test going on? Sam, you feel good, Miguel?
I'm having some troubles utilizing the data in order to produce some what's it called graphs at the moment. Like I have all of the graphs that they generated for me for what's it called
Mhm.
fast bridge reading, but I wouldn't feel right using those. So I'm what should I do in that predicament?
So you can, take your data and create, I don't know how you want to display it, if you want to use a bar graph, chart, pie graph, however you want to do it, whichever you feel comfortable doing. Um, and just take that data and display it within there. Now, moving ahead, like I'm going to jump ahead real quick on the CBM. There's a specific type of graph that you're going to need to use on for your data points, which I will cover that when we meet next week, specifically that graph because showing your highs and lows. But um, what how did they display it in the report you're looking at, Miguel? I mean, was it a bar graph? Was it a pie graph? Was it
Well, they give us numerical data in terms of scores like 516 for fall assessment, and they improved to 526 for the winter assessment that they did.
okay?
Yeah,
So,
that was
so
the most
what
recent.
what is the maximum on that that's considered? Is it fast bridge?
Yes, it's fast bridge. It has a maximum and a minimum
Okay.
um little thing as well as a benchmark.
Yeah. So what's the maximum on it?
Maximum is
So you could just take your maximum and put that on your, if you're going to use a bar graph, and then go in there and input your scores, and then your bars will show. You can label them 516, 568, whatever, and do it like on bar graphs or line graphs, however you want to do it, and just
and
create
I'm
your own.
supposed
Huh?
and I'm supposed to compare my student scores to the rest of the school or on the
Yeah,
national scale.
yeah, on the national, yeah, exactly. So
And
you're
does it have to be?
like percentile rank. So does it give a percentile rank?
Yes, it gives them a percentile.
That's where you're comparing it to the group. So if he scored in the 38th percentile, he scored as well, if not better than 38% of the norm group, is how you would state that. So you're comparing it to the norm group. His percentile rank is that that's comparing it to that group right there.
Okay, so that is two graphs there then.
Yep.
Hmm. All right. I'm starting to see. Is there a limit in the terms of like how many graphs you want or
No, I mean you can you can put 2, 3, 4. I've had some put 5 on there. They just want to display it different ways in their report. As long as you present the information according to the rubric there, you're gonna be good.
Okay, and do you have an sample, example of this?
Yeah, there's an example posted in the 805 resources of the norm reference test in the SPED 805 resources section, which I can flip over there and share my screen in just a moment.
Oh, no, sorry, I've taken enough of your time. Let's
No,
not
you're,
waste any
you're,
more
you're
of
fine.
Daniel's.
I'm good at doing that. It's no problem. Really. So, but I do have an example of each one of those in there.
Okay,
I'm gonna go back and reference. Yeah, for sure. So give you an idea kind of what to look at. And even as I mentioned a while ago, again, kind of jumping ahead, I will definitely pull up the one next week when we're in on Zoom session, because so you can see exactly what that specific graph is going to look like on displaying those data points that you collect for the CBM. So I will actually pull that one up and show you exactly what we're looking for on that.
all right.
Because it looks a little bit different than a pie graph or just a standard bar graph or line graph. It looks quite a bit different. It's easy to do and put your data points in there and plot it. It's just a different format. A lot of times too, and I don't know what you used before. I can't remember off the top of my head, but a lot of times the students will go in when they're creating these tables, charts, and graphs, and a lot of times kind of their standard go-to is using creating those in PowerPoint and then copy and drop them over and paste them in your report. That's what a lot of them do. If you're comfortable using PowerPoint. Okay,
Okay,
that kind of give you some direction there.
yes.
If you're using the same case study students, so this is report number 2, and I mentioned this the first night, if you remember, if you use the same case study student all the way through, you can use their information in the background on this report. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel on that. Okay. But if it's a different student, you'll have to recreate this background section because it's obviously a different student. But if it's the same, just use the same exact information used in the informal. Okay. The identifying information, same type of format, but obviously your dates are going to be different. The date the test was administered, name of the test, purpose, reason why it was selected. So that will differ a little bit. Then your test results and interpretation section obviously is going to be different because it's a different type of assessment is administered. Still, you're going to present the data and using a table, chart, or graph. That's the same type of format, obviously different data in it. Then you're going to give an explanation on it. Okay, just kind of give a summary explaining the information you put in those visual representations, and then support the conclusion you come up with. So based on the data that's in there, what's your conclusion on that based on what you reviewed as far as the information, the scores that were there, and just make sure you highlight the strengths and weaknesses from this assessment for this particular one. Each one of them, you may see different strengths and weaknesses from the informal compared to this norm reference. Okay, so just make sure you highlight those in that section. Summary and conclusion, again, very similar to what you guys did when you submitted your informal. You're going to kind of just give a brief summary and conclusion, tie your key findings together with a little bit of the background of the student. You've already got a little bit of background information, especially if you're using the same case study student, a little bit, so you can kind of connect some of the observations and some of the knowledge you have of that student and kind of tied into some of the strengths and weaknesses and just kind of wrap it all in there and summarize their performance. And then on this one, what would be some recommendations that you would make based on the data, based on the strengths and weaknesses? Okay. What would be some things you would recommend to help this student out as far as instructional planning? Would you go in and recommend maybe we modify the grade level content? Should we drop it down a little bit? Are you seeing that the material is obviously too difficult? for the student to where maybe you need to drop it down. If the student's fifth grade and really struggling, you're looking at the data, maybe we need to drop it down to fourth grade, possibly even midway through the third grade year if it's, very obvious that they're struggling. So that's kind of the recommendation section. Then again, we're wrapping it up. I'm looking for some things as far as mechanics and organization. Make sure you attach a permission form, even if it's the same student that you used in the informal. Make sure you go ahead and attach that. And then also make sure you include the lesson plan using that template that's in the 805. This lesson plan, you're just going to develop it based on the weak areas that you've identified, you feel like that you need to address for this student based on the information you've included for the norm to reference. Okay. This lesson is not being developed based on your data that you collected from the informal. It's strictly off this norm reference. We're focusing on it for the lesson plan. Okay. Pretty much very straightforward. Is there any question on that, what we're looking at? In the format of the reports, pretty much exact same. You still have your specific breakdown on your categories, your summary and conclusion section, your test results, the background information, and your identifying information. Okay, very similar. We're just putting different data in there. Okay. Any questions on that?
Recently I was able to administer 2 CBMs. I just had a question. Do I have to stick with my course area of like expertise like English? I checked out the website you gave us, freecbms.com, and noticed they only had 2 English ones. Should I do a math one or just like a second English one,
You
despite
can
it
do a
being of the same?
second English one of that's similar to what you gave already if you used English. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? I'm gonna stop my screen share on that and switch over to something else quickly. You'll bear with me just a moment here. It's a little weird to say that, I don't know why it's all of a sudden. There we go. Something I did want to point out to you, I would encourage you keep down. I'm backward course sharing seat on your end. Sam, you guys. You seeing it? Okay, all right. See his shake. I wanted to make sure it seemed like it was delayed. So I wanted to drop down and show you something and share with you, just kind of show you where it's at. Um, I met with a student previously a few minutes ago and showed them, and they're actually getting ready to sit in a MEGS meeting to where a similar report's going to be presented. So for just a minute, we'll get to it so I can show you where it's at. So if you click on the tab for week 4 and 5, it's combined right there. It says week 4 and 5, formal assessments, norm reference. You'll scroll down, the very last tab under that is titled Comprehensive Report. I wanted to show you this quickly, show you where it's at. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it up. So this particular report is an example of what is presented, excuse me, in a MEGS meeting. So basically the MEGS meeting, Sam, is the meeting that takes place after the formal testing is all complete. The school psychologist or the psychometrist will come in and present this information to the full team. Okay, this is based on them giving, you can see here, This psychoeducational evaluation report was done using Woodcock Johnson 4. So basically, it gives you the reason for the referral. It includes background information on the particular student. Then we get into test session observations. It talks about things I saw as I was given the different test. And then it gives a breakdown. As I mentioned in class last week, the first half of a report like this is all in narrative format. It's all going in and providing a narrative, giving detailed explanations of the results that were collected from the test. So if we scroll through this, we're going into statistical data. Just kind of want to show you. And again, I would encourage you to go back and pull this resource up and look at it. It'll kind of helping when you do. So this particular report is about 17, 18 pages long. And so we're working to the end of the narrative. One thing I wanted to point out to you, and you've heard me mention this in class, part of the process that takes place that will involve you is if a student's getting ready to have an initial eval done or an adaptive, or I'm sorry, a reeval, then you may be asked to complete an adaptive behavior scale on the student. Okay. So this one here, this particular adaptive that was used was what we call the ABES. One that is common that I use now for most every student that I'm going to evaluate. I always ask them to use the Vinland. So it's just a different adaptive behavior scale. It's a little bit more in depth compared to the ABES. But those will include information there as part of the report. And again, this is what you would provide based on the educational setting, on what you see, Sam or Miguel, what you would observe from the student. You go through there and check all of it. Then they give the parent one to do based on how they see that student perform different tasks and different behaviors that they observe in the home. Then we take all that, we score it, collect it, and then we put it all in here in this report. So that's what that little section is. Just point that out to you. Then there's a recommendation and intervention section. So usually we'll go through and anything we notice that kind of was a low or weak area in reading, math, or perhaps writing, we'll make some recommendations on some interventions that could take place in the classroom. Then we also do that same thing for their adaptive behavior. That's some things that might benefit the student, whether it's in the school setting or whether it's in the home setting. Okay. Then the last part is where we get into all the numbers, all the data that is being collected based on how that student is scored for all the different subtests. So the whole last half of this report is very similar to what you're seeing on your screen right now. Lots of subtests, lots of areas to look at. And Sam, you guys, if you look at that, you think, oh my gosh, there is a lot of information on there. And it is overwhelming. Another thing that we often do, it's not in this example, started doing it after I had posted this, but one thing I do in addition to this particular report is go in, I have a it's basically on a Google Doc, but it's a bell curve, and right below it I take and I put in all these individual scores based on their percentile ranking, and I go through there and list them, and it will plot it on that bell curve, and I've got the bell curve is color coded. Okay, so the 85 to 110 we're looking, that's what I call the average range. That's where we really like to see those scores fall. If it's above that to the right, we're getting into some higher scores. That's when we could start looking at to see if student maybe qualifies for gifted and talented. We could use this same thing for gifted talented in addition to determinative special services. It could be used for either purpose. And then if they are lower, below 85, to that 70 range, at low average range, it's color coded a different way than if they get 70 and below. I have that color coded in red because those always say it's kind of a danger zone. We get into some really discrepancies there. So it gives them a visual representation of this as well. It helps the parents understand. So you can see it'll list all the different areas of subtests that are used to come up with that particular category. So you can see here we have general intellectual ability score. It shows what the grade equivalency is for the student. And if you look up here, the student was 16 years old, 16 years, 10 months at the time that they were tested. It was a reeval. So their general intellectual ability overall, if we look at grade equivalency, was eighth grade, 7th month. Okay. If you go over here, you have RPI, you have a proficiency. His proficiency, it put him in the average range. That would be more over on the low average side. Then we have the standard scores. It was a 96. Standard score classification was in the average range. Percentile rank. That PR is percentile rank, Miguel. That's what I was just talking to you about a while ago. Okay, is a 39. So the student scored as well, if not better than 39% of the group that was normed. Okay. So that kind of gives you an idea, some of the information there. If you kind of go down through here, you can kind of see here proficiency. You can see average to advanced. The student has scored really high on number series, okay, which is a subtest that was given. You can see that particularly strong in that area. Grade equivalency was post-high school, 14.0. Average to advanced. His standard score was 107. Okay. Then we have dropped down his verbal attention was limited to average. Then his letter pattern matching. Grade equivalency was 7th grade. Based on his age and the group he was normed against, he was scored a limited proficiency. Okay. So that kind of just gives you just a broad overview. I just kind of wanted to share that with you, show you where it's at, would encourage you to go back. You have a little free time, want to look at that. It'll give you some interesting information, and you kind of see how we take all that information and put it into this report form. As you see, there's a lot. So if you are, next time you're sitting in a MEAGS meeting and they come in and start going over it, you're going to go, oh, I remember Dr. Posey kind of showed us an example of that, what it looks like. So usually parents get a copy. Usually in that meeting, they'll bring multiple copies. And if you're sitting at the table, they may have you look on with your neighbor there and they'll kind of go over it and follow along. So it's kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. So this student overall, you can see on down here, oral reading fluent under reading fluency is oral reading. So that is a subtest where they're given passages and starts off very basic and goes up to some very high level of difficulty. And I'm having to track them and mark mistakes. And so there's a lot of movement going on as far as my end on scoring it. Okay, so that's something that I have to listen to. You can see this student's oral reading fluency is very, very good. Okay, grade equivalency, well above post-high school, 17.9. You can see scored advanced as far as his proficiency level. Standard score was 117. Okay, that's getting up there in that higher tier. Here's one right here too, is oral reading. Just so the reading fluency I just showed you is 117. His oral reading ability was very superior, very advanced, 138. Okay. Could read like the wind. Okay, but there's some other areas on down through this test he scored low in when it came to reading. So he could read just anything you put in front of him, but on down may have trouble processing in some other areas when it came to reading. So it's always interesting when you look at these scores, you can see some real definite strengths. And then when we get over into some other subtests, you'll also see some weak areas in reading as well. So Math calculation skills, you can see he had limited proficiency. Okay, that is a time test. Okay, so when they're expected to work under a time format, okay, for his age and how he scored, his proficiency was considered to be very limited. Okay. If I drop down on the cognitive side, that achievement is timed. If I drop down and the student did some testing on the cognitive test that's not timed, those skills, he scored a little bit higher because he was able to take his time. His processing was a little slower. He was able to work through it. It's not timed. On those, we're looking at if they hit their ceiling. You remember me talking about that last week, their ceiling, where they maybe had to get 4 in a row, and then I stopped the test. The ceiling was 4. They score 4 consecutively incorrect. The test is over. I stop it. Okay. Doesn't matter how many problems they got, we're done. Okay, so on that, the student could work through to a little bit higher level, but when it's timed and they've got a set number to do and they've only got, 2 or 3 minutes to do it, they may struggle processing that quick. Okay? A lot of things you can read into and interpret when you look at these, knowing. A lot of his scores overall were average, high average. The student had a couple weak areas. One of them you can see on down here, provide you. He was 2 standard deviations below in visualization. He had trouble visualizing some things. So these are tasks that he's given, and he has to visualize all these different shapes and visually in his mind, how would I put those together to where they fit correctly? He's not manipulating anything with his hands. It's all visual. So students struggled there. That was a weak area for him. You go down, if they were so many standard deviations above, it showed it as a strength. Right here, you can see he had a weakness in reading recall. Okay, that particular test is specific details, not just general broad things out of a story, but very specific things. And when I score them, I'm looking for specific words from a story they've got to tell me in order to get credit for that. Okay, so remembering details, students struggle with that. That's basically what that subtest is. Okay. So again, you can see only had a couple areas. This particular student was a reeval. So the student had made a lot of gains. I shared with a student earlier when I did a Zoom session with them. This particular student we tested, younger, probably one of the most hyper students ADD that I'd ever worked with when they were younger. Parents decided to go ahead and do a medication. Once they did, the student was able to slow their mind down. They did really well. Everything kind of came together for them. Plus, they had an excellent work ethic. So they were able to overcome some of their weak, deficient areas just due to simply their work ethic and being able to just to stick through and grind through it when it was challenging. So student was basically in high school, was not served in a resource room, was pretty much making A, B's, and C's. But parents did request to go ahead and revow because they were getting ready to go into their senior year. Ended up going into the armed forces in the military now, doing well. So you can kind of see how went from struggling as about a fifth, sixth grader, things changed and evolved and how they progressed. So anyway, you get a chance, go back and look at that. I'll give you some good information. You might have any question over that format or anything you want to ask? I could literally do 2 hours and go over nothing but that in detail, and you'd be just fine. But good information in them. It's also interesting too, if you are sitting in a meeting, Miguel, and you had a student that was tested and you're going to sit down and look at this comprehensive report, and you have done some informal assessments in your room and some CBMs and all that, it's really interesting if you've got that information and you look at this comprehensive and how things will correlate. Doing all that and then having this formal report to compare the information to. So That's why I like doing this assessment class, and you kind of see how things kind of come together, the different types of assessments, and how everything kind of comes together and creates the whole picture for the student. Gives you their overall how they're performing overall. Any questions on that? No? Everyone good?
So with our final product of doing this 3 tests, will our page look nearly as big as this?
For the norm reference?
No, CBM.
No, no, it will not. Your CBM report will look just pretty very similar to the norm reference report that you're working on now, and very similar to the format for the informal that you did.
Hmm.
Okay. This right here is an example of what a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation report looks like. And the reason the reason we initially posted this in here was if students were going to use the alternate assessment, the testing video, because they didn't have access to use a norm reference test or get the information from a school psych or a school psychometrist, or they didn't have FastBridge or map testing or any of the software programs that fell into that norm reference range. I created that video for students to use as an alternate to this assignment, and then I provided this report so they would have some data to pull off of it.
Okay. I just wanted to know because I can see how the math from chapter 6 is going to help. Oh, well, like chapter 5, I think, is going to help us with this. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. Now, if you remember the chapter 5 PowerPoint, some of the slides in that slide deck and the terminology is reflective in these reports. Some of the different terms I use and all that, percentile ranks, and some of the things that I said, if you remember when I was going over that, I said, hey, some of these terms I'm throwing out there, you may not really ever work with them, but I at least wanted you to kind of hear them and be exposed to them and be familiar. A lot of that terminology is embedded within this report, especially when you're looking at this statistical information here, percentile rank, standard deviation, grade equivalencies, age equivalencies. Those are some specific terms I mentioned off that slide deck, if you remember. It's been
Yeah.
a couple weeks. Yeah.
No, I remember. I've been reading the thing extensively to try to prepare for this latest assignment, or, well, the current assignment.
Yeah. So anyway, like I said, this can be overwhelming. I just wanted to share it with you in case you want to go back and look at it at another time, just as a resource. And once you kind of see it and have a general understanding, it kind of helps connect things. Again, especially if you're getting ready for a student that's been evaluated and you're going to end up sitting in one of those meetings. When they mention some of the different terminology, you'll go, I remember that. Remember, we talked about that in 805. So,
I'll say
then
I'm actually going through a re-eval process right now with one of my students.
yeah. So after they finish and get all the data, the evaluator will go back and put together this type of report. It'll look very similar. It may vary a little bit, but it's going to have generally the same format. So I don't know what assessment your district may be using or the evaluator. This one was done using the WJ4, but even if I use the WIS5 or whatever it was, the report formats are going to look very similar to this, the layout of it. Okay. So
So I'm going through 2 reevals right now,
this,
and our psychologist or whatever is just doing like a waiver. And so I'm not getting to see any of that. Is that something that I should be requesting to see, like what it looks like for waivers?
a
Like,
waiver is in, tell me what she's doing for a waiver.
so instead of doing the 3-year reevaluation, they're just like signing a waiver saying, we don't need a reeval because the
No,
students,
they're often not to do it. I got
yes,
to understand what you're
they,
saying now. How old is the student?
Um, one of them's like 15 and the other one's 16.
So a lot of times age has something to do with it. I will tell you that. I'm gonna say probably it's not uncommon for when they get up into high school, 15, 16, 17 years old, for a parent to say, yeah, I don't want to reeval. I just want to waive that and not do it. I've seen that happen quite a bit. This report that I've been kind of going over, Marissa, is the parent had requested it was time for their reeval and requested we do it because they wanted to see if decisions they had made when he was about sixth grade on trying the medication and different things, if it closed a lot of the gaps. So when I did the Zoom session and met with the student earlier that wanted to go over this, I kind of gave them the broad version of this particular student. So all through elementary, he struggled, basically just literally was bouncing off the wall. I mean, he was just hyper as all get out. And as a result of that, he missed a lot of foundational skills when he was in elementary. Okay. And he was just all over the place. And finally, mom and dad decided, all right, we can't keep fighting this battle. And they decided that they were going to try the medication side to see if they could just get his mind to slow down to help him focus. And it did, it helped. And so that's about sixth grade. So sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, he started maturing emotionally and he had a good work ethic. He worked on a farm, they lived in the country and he worked hard worker and it carried over in the classroom. And so those gaps started closing. He was reevaluated then, and then it's coming up time when he was a junior, and so we did it again when he was a junior, and the parents are just curious. And so the student I met with at 5:30, I told them it was really interesting to go back and look. And you could see the different assessments and reevals that were done, and you could see those gaps closing. You can see the scores and and all these subtests had improved. So, but in high school, a lot of times it is not uncommon for them to do that, to waive it.
Okay, question two. So we have I just got an email like yesterday that I have a student that was on a 504 but is now going to go to an IEP, go be put on an IEP. Um,
Have they done
so like,
the
do we have
testing?
any, huh? Well, the psychologist, like, I think she emailed and was like, well, we're gonna have like a beginning meeting, like you're gonna write a draft to propose to the parents. But I just didn't know, like, are we supposed to be invited to these to like see how they're done? Like, are we
The
supposed to attend them, like where they're doing the testing to see if they
Okay,
qualify?
so while they're doing the actual testing, no, because you want them in a room to where there's no distractions, no, you know what I'm saying? Now, some students have been able to go in and observe to help do this assignment, but as far as having, like you coming in on a normal basis and watching those, normally that does not happen unless someone's trying to get some internship hours and you have to get permissions to do that. Where you come into play is after, let's say I came in and did the evaluation. Hey, for this student, I'm doing it. I get all my scoring done. I go back and I'm gonna put this report together. Then I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna do the MEGS meeting. And that MEGS meeting essentially is to review the test and determine placement. And that's when I'm going to come in with this type of report and I'm going to go over and explain all of it. And the one thing I always tell everyone too is so they know is like, hey, this is basically it's a statistical snapshot of the student during the test sessions that I came in. So there's other pertinent information you have to look at too as well. But this is all just a statistical snapshot. Okay. Now you should be in on that, the meetings meeting. Yeah, you definitely want to be in on it. So you can hear and see some of this. And like I was saying earlier, if you've done some of the informals in your room and some CBNs and done some tracking, you should see some correlation of what the scores you collected and also some that's scores on the more formalized assessment here in this report.
Yeah, and I think that they sent out an invitation to the Meigs meeting too. So that should be good to
Yeah,
get.
so some of the terminology I went over in the slide deck, and then this basic format, you're going to hear a lot of that. And some of you go, okay, yeah, I remember he mentioned that in 805. Yeah, that makes sense. I understand now. But if you've never seen anything or heard any of that terminology, and you go to some of those meetings, you're like, what in the world are they talking about? It can be overwhelming. It can. So always say I try to put myself across the table in the seat of the parent and imagine how they're feeling. So I always try to take that in consideration when I'm coming in and trying to explain that to them so they can understand. Always try to imagine, okay, if that was my child and I was sitting on that side of the table, how am I going to, am I going to be able to understand what I'm saying here? So does that answer your question? That's kind of a long answer for,
No, yeah, it does for sure. Just
okay,
yeah.
yeah. Again, on the reeval when they're older, I've seen it quite a bit where parents is like, we're not going to have them reevaluated, so.
Well, that's the thing. It kind of comes from like our side of it. They're like, oh, well, I'm gonna reach out to the parent and see if they're okay with reevaluating or not reevaluating, just signing a waiver. They're like I've had them reach out to me and they're like, so do you think that has anything changed? And like obviously nothing's changed. They've been on an IEP their whole life. My caseload is really adapted kids, like they still need services. They're not.
Now, sometimes if they're older like that, and you're already thinking about, transitional services and then transitioning out of high school, you might want to do that reeval because if if you are working in conjunction with like Department of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, I don't know how visible they are in Kansas or how well they work with you guys in the school districts, but like here in Oklahoma, they're very visible, and so they'll come in and they have work study programs for your high school students, and then they start helping to prepare them transition out of high school, and then they will also help them as they're transitioning into adulthood, and they have different tiers or levels of services depending on their disability. So down
So
here, if they're very engaged uh in part of Voc Rehab, and Voc Rehab does a detailed plan for them, transition plan, and they like to have current test data. So a lot of times if they're a junior and it's time for reeval, the Voc Rehab counselor may really want that because it helps them moving forward the next 3 years.
so you think that if it's a student that might probably isn't going to be able to have independent living skills, like is going to need those transition services and they're going to graduate before another reeval comes up, that like I should be advocating for them to get their reeval so that way they can have
It,
that.
it might be wise to do that because they
Okay.
really like to have that data to help. It will help guide that counselor, the Voc Rehab, or if it's another agency, you guys may have another agency. I'm just using Voc Rehab here in Oklahoma, but
You have a school, I think what you're kind of talking like a post high school where they do like job stuff where they take them and work on like job skills and stuff
they
like
do
that.
job skills, they help placement, they even help. I'll use my own family. I've got two nieces, they're twins. My brother-in-law adopted them, and because of the level they were, um, they help with job skills, they help with job placement, and they also helped with some locating an apartment, getting them established, helping them set up utilities, and basically helping them get established as young adults to become, productive young adults. And then after they get them established and they'll come in, like when they first got their apartment and all that, they would come in and check and do visits and check what their work and all that. Then they kind of, as they age a little bit, they start pulling back. And I mean, they've been off of it now. I mean, they're 26, 27 years old. They're doing great. They're successful. But had it not been for Voc Rehab, they very easily could have slipped through the cracks right out of high school and struggled. They'll help make sure they get their driver's license and I mean just basic things like that. So yeah, sometimes it may be a deal depending on the level, Marissa, where if they may have to do I call it a sheltered workshop, or where they go to cottage style living to where maybe there's 3 or 4 of them living there and they have, I call it a house parent or a house supervisor, and they go to work during the day and they come back there in the evening and it teaches them how to somewhat live independently, but yet they are supervised as well. So it depends on the level. Does that help give you some ideas?
Yeah, it definitely does. Like, especially, I
But
have
if
some students
I
who are
will
like,
say, if they're engaged with someone like that, they like to have that data because it gives them current data to assist in that transitional planning.
yeah, because I have most of my caseload is freshmen and sophomores, but like as they're coming up for reeval, like they won't have another one before they graduate. And so like I see the like in their past transition plans because they're all new to me. And it's like, oh, like they're gonna live with mom and dad, like not gonna be able to have a job on their own. So I wonder, like I do wonder about that, kind of like how what you're talking
And
about.
there's a lot of them that can, and through
Right,
both rehab partnering and all that, they can get out and do it. I mean, and live on their own. And ultimately, that's the goal. You want them to be successful out there and have some independence.
right. Yeah. And we in USC 259, I don't know where everybody else is from, but we have a school called Chisholm, and then they like partner with our Aero, Spirit, and Cessna, and they'll take the kids and they'll take them like to be able to sweep and give them jobs like just sweeping in the big factory, like
Yeah,
I want to say factories, so stuff like that.
sure. And so they teach them some basic skills to where they can go to a job every day. They have responsibilities and learn how to live independently and learn how to manage money and budget. I mean, that ultimately that's the goal. We want them to be as independent as possible. And I've seen it work. I mean, like I said, I've got those 2 twin nieces and they're doing great right now. I mean, very proud of them that knowing where they were when they were younger and where they're at now. So the program is well worth it if you have a partnership like that, for sure. So, all right. Any other questions? I kind of got off on this thing, so I just wanted to share it with you. Again, it's a great resource to go back and look at, especially if you've got maybe a MEES meeting coming up. You can look at it. It's like, okay, kind of have an idea now what they're going to be talking about. So. CBMs, let's talk about that quickly. Has everyone kind of found I call it a probe or your little assessment probe to do? Has everyone decided on that or kind of got an idea? This is kind of where they're overlapping a little bit, the assignments, but does everyone feel comfortable right now with it?
Can we use one that our school has?
You can?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you sure can. I mentioned a website last week that's got some free resources on it, some probes that are out there, easycbm.com. If you guys need that. So if you can, ultimately the goal is between now and when their assignments due is to get 5 to 6 data points. So given that, 5 to 6 times to collect that. That's why I was really encouraging you guys to go ahead and maybe start that when we met last week. So you can get a jump start on it. So
And I just wanted to double check because I do have a student that we do a weekly check with them with
Mhm.
CBMs, and I want to make sure it's okay if I'm using previous data
You can
or.
some of the weeks before to get your 5 or 6. That's fine. Yeah, if you've
Mhm.
been doing it weekly and ongoing, it's current. Yeah, you can pull that data to help get your 5 to 6.
Okay.
Yep. We've done that, especially when this class switched over to the 8-week format. We kind of had to condense some things down. So I always tell them, hey, if you've been doing ongoing with that student, go back and pull 2 to 3 weeks prior to the class started if you need to get those. So yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Anything else before we go?
Real
No.
quick, whenever you say 5 to 6 points for data, is it just like for the same type of CBM test, or can they
Same
be
type of
differentiated?
CBM. That's right. The same
Okay.
exact type of CBM. You're going to administer that 5 to 6 times. You can switch the problems around. I wouldn't leave them the same because they're going to memorize that. Switch them around, jumble them a little bit, give it to them and see. The ultimate goal is you want to see an improvement each time you do it. And I mentioned this before in a previous Zoom, but if you give that, and let's say after the third time you've administered it, if you're seeing a downward trend, that right there tells you that it's well above their ability level. You need to drop it down grade level content. Okay. We want to see a steady progression upward. Okay. So if you give it, and let's say I'm just going to throw out a number. Let's just say they scored, 7 out of 10. Then you mix it up a little bit and you give it again, and then you see it goes down to 5. And then the third time you give it and you mix it up a little bit and you give it and it's a 4. Well, we've got a downward trend. The difficulty level is too much and you drop it back a little bit. Okay. Okay, guys, if you don't have any other questions, we'll kind of end for tonight. Remember that the norm reference report will be due on Sunday at midnight. Also, don't forget to do the lesson plan part of it as well and include that with it. So, um,
Question real quick. So for
yeah,
our CBMs for reading anyways, in our district, we give 3 tests and then it comes out with a score. So it's like 3 passages. So do we need to do all 3 or just one as a data point? And then how would
you could
you?
you could do one passage,
Yeah,
get a
so it's like
data point, and then drop down. It's going to be the second passage will be very similar in
right
in a in difficulty level. It's not going to be the exact same, but it's going to be very similar. And give them the second passage for the second data point.
for a second data point.
Yeah. So again, this is something that's going to be
Okay.
quick. It's like a
Yeah.
I mentioned in another Zoom. It's kind of like a glorified informal.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that was okay because if we just gave one like for our actual test scores, they'd be like, no, we need all 3. But I want to make sure it was okay to just do
So
one for
just
this.
give the first passage for one data point, drop down the next time you give it, give the second passage and all that. They're all going to be very similar difficulty level, but yet it's not the exact same. It's going to be very
Right.
similar. Okay.
Okay, sweet.
All right. Hey guys, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, or if you're really stumped and have a challenge, email me and I'll jump on. We'll do a quick Zoom. I did that earlier for students, so not a problem doing it. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. Have a good evening. See you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Real quick, what was the name of the norm reference example file?
The example file, the comprehensive report.
No, for the one that we're doing now. The one that's due this Sunday?
Yeah. So under 805, if you go under the resources, it should say norm reference example.
Hmm. I'm sorry I've been difficult about this, sir.
No, you're over. A minute.
All right. Well, I've taken up enough of your time. Please take
No, you're
care. Have a
fine.
nice
Hang
evening.
on. If you'll hang on, I'm gonna switch over and I'll show you real quick.
Hmm.
You'll bear with me just a second here. Hang on just a minute. I'm doing that. Hang on just a second, Miguel.